What are we talking about today?
Well, I'm hoping you can walk us through something that's been coming up a lot in our financial planning clients' conversations with you as their advisor. I'm seeing a lot of notes and tasks that get generated from meetings around what happens when clients are changing jobs, whether that's, a positive reason, like they got promoted, they got a new job, they changed careers, they're super excited about switching companies, or for a negative reason, as we're seeing more and more recently. I feel like with disruptions in tech and biotech, maybe there was a layoff, a role was eliminated because of a merger. Whatever the reason, clients are always flying around different job changes. I think that kind of just comes with the territory, right? When you're in your 30s and your 40s.
Yeah, even just the fact that if you stay with a company, it's shown that your income doesn't grow as fast as if you switch companies to go to a new job and they're paying you more to get there. So I think it's logical that people would want to shift for any number of reasons, from company is not what they expected, company goes under, they want to elevate their career, get more pay, get a different position, and actually get promoted. So there's plenty of reasons to change. And with the change comes a whole heck of a lot of stuff that people don't necessarily think about other than, ooh, new job, I like it, let me go to it.
Yeah, so imagine you just got a job offer, like you said, Eric, more money, better title, you're excited, you accept it, you're ready to jump in. But then a few weeks later, you realize, oh, my insurance has just drastically changed. Oh, I don't have that group plan anymore. And guess what? The new company doesn't offer it. Suddenly there's a big gap. And there's also questions like, oh, your 401k, well, you funded it at the old job. Now you've got the new one. How much do you contribute so you don't go over the limit? I feel like that's a big thing that most people miss when they change jobs, because it's not an easy calculation to make. So today we're going to dig into all those details to understand how to better manage money around a career pivot like that, whether it's, changing jobs just like W-2 to W-2 income, whether your new job comes with a lot of equity comp that you've not dealt with before, and how does that impact taxes? Or whether you do have a layoff, like what do you need to think about as an immediate next step to cover insurance gaps, for example? So let's start there maybe, because I think that affects everyone the most widely, regardless of why they're changing jobs, is the gap in benefits that you're going to face. Like, what are you going to lose the day you leave, for whatever reason, your current job?
Well, I think there's a key thing to point out too. If you're leaving your job and transitioning to a new job within a week, or you're leaving your job, whether it's your choice or not, and the new job doesn't start for 6 months, right? Either it's a layoff or maybe it was a non-compete and you couldn't start the next job until 6 months from now. There's a big difference in the two things. There is a gap in one and not a gap in the other. So let's just get clear on which part of that we're talking about first.
So you mean like a gap in income that you've got to deal with before you even deal with the gap in benefits?
No, gap in health insurance. Like the health insurance is going to basically switch from one to the other, and there isn't going to be a huge gap if you're changing jobs in a week. If you're changing jobs in 6 months, there's going to be a huge gap potentially.
Well, there could still be a gap, though, because that's what I think is interesting when people are changing jobs is they don't necessarily, they have their offer letter, but they don't ask for like, can I see the benefits guide so I can compare my health insurance to what I have to what it's going to be? Not that that's a reason to not accept, but it's something to plan around if the insurance options are radically different at the new job and suddenly you don't have the same kind of coverage that you did before.
Yeah, I do see that people aren't pushing for the details of their benefits package early on before they start the job, and they say, oh, I'm going to start, and then in the first 30 days, I'll get all the information. Well, yeah, but planning is important to do beforehand. So it would be nice to get all the details there. I don't know that you're going to get it, though, depending on what employer it is. You may not get it before you're accepted as the applicant for the job.
Okay, so let's just deal with then the longer term gap. If you want to talk about health insurance first, or when you're looking at a longer gap between jobs, what are your options?
Yeah, you're automatically, if you lose coverage because you lost your job in this case, then there is a 30-day window for you to get new coverage. Or if you accept a new position and you have a new available set of benefits, there's another 30-day window there. So leaving one plan and getting into another isn't necessarily the problem. It's just making sure that your family is covered between one job and the next. And so there's COBRA, right? COBRA would basically say like, you can pay into COBRA. You're probably going to pay a little bit more because your old employer is not supplementing your premiums anymore, but you can pay into Cobra to lock in the same plan until you start the new company. And then you can reset with whatever they have there. Ideally, they'd have the same or similar plan to you. Like if you're using a high deductible plan in one company, the other company is offering a high deductible plan too. So you can continue along, hopefully using your HSA and maxing that out and growing that for the future, which is a strategy that we like a lot for a lot of people. But not having something drastically different where you have to find new doctors and deal with who's in your network. Like that's a massive disruption for a family, especially if you have young kids that have a good doctor that they like to go to.
So it's certainly a reason to push for a benefits guide as part of your negotiations. If this is a planned job change, ask for, so you have that information at least, so it can help you plan ahead better. But also a job change or a job loss, that's a qualifying life event, right? So it's kind of a planning opportunity if you have a spouse or a partner to consider getting onto their insurance plan if that's not how it was set up for you anyway. How have you seen clients kind of deal with that if one is changing jobs and either they were on their own insurance or the family was on their plan from the job they're leaving?
Yeah. Well, I mean, so in this case, I was talking before about Cobra. That most likely meant that either your spouse isn't working or they don't have a good plan to jump onto. It would be an option to, before you accept a job, look at your spouse's plan to see if those are good options, because at the worst, if those are good options, then yes, you do have that 30-day window after you leave your job and lose coverage to jump onto their plan to connect the dots. You could stay on their plan, or you could jump back to another new plan at your new company, because that's another 30-day window when you get exposure to that one when the time comes. So that there's definitely a lot of strategy there you can take advantage of, but doing so beforehand and not saying, well, I just left my job, now what do I do for coverage, is probably not the best move.
Any other things that clients have been doing to kind of plan around that potential gap in health insurance specifically?
Yeah, I mean, I think another thing is just to put maybe more money aside in savings than you might think you need to, because if you switch plans, and in the case where you've maxed out your deductible and now you're not paying as much to use the services under your insurance coverage, and you are resetting to a new plan, you start over from zero with the new deductible. That's a major disruption in your normal cadence. If your typical is max out deductible, pay less for insurance the rest of the year, and it's a similar thing year after year, because you will have to start paying more right away in June if you're resetting your deductible then.
Got it. I guess that's something about like, kind of saving ahead for that, which made me think of HSAs. How does that work when you're changing employers? If you have an HSA, is that something that gets considered when you're switching jobs, or does that get rolled over like a 401k? How does that work when the job change is in the air?
That's a tough one. I mean, the HSA itself, right? If in the simplest version, you have an HSA and a high deductible plan with one job, then you switch to one that has a high deductible plan and an HSA with the new job. And so maxing out the HSA family is $8,750 for the 2026 calendar year. There's no problems here. Just like your 401k, you can leave your HSA where it was. You can roll it to a new one. You can actually roll it to somewhere else and just use a different independent HSA, like a Lively or something like that, where you can manage it on your own. HSAs are more flexible than 401ks in that sense.
So Lively is the platform that you would roll it onto, and then it's just your HSA, like regardless of what the new job offers for health insurance, whether you would have an HSA or not, like that HSA is yours and comes with you.
Yes, you can. Yeah, you can do whatever you want with it. Lively is just an example in this case. But the challenge comes in when you're talking about having a high deductible plan. If you maxed it out at $8,750 and you leave in June and you go to a plan that's not a high deductible plan for the rest of the year, and you don't actually have the HSA available with the high deductible plan from December 1st to December 31st of that calendar year, you might be in trouble. You might have to actually pay back or take out some of the contributions because you don't have that plan in place, and you're not going to have that plan, assumingly, in the next 12 months either. So there's some very nuanced details here that you have to pay attention to when it comes to that. On the other side of the coin, if you don't have a high deductible plan and then you get one in June, you can fully max it out by the end of the year, as long as you are, one, holding it across December 1st to the 31st of that year, and you plan to hold it through the next December of the following year. Then you're good to max out the current year HSA plan. So it's really tricky. I was looking at this recently. It's really tricky. And a lot of people, I'm sure, screw it up.
Yeah, I was going to say, it just blows my mind of like, this is what we do like for a living. And it's tricky, right? It's complicated to track all that. So I can't imagine what someone who's just like doing their daily, like, I just changed jobs. Isn't this great? Like, well, have you thought about your HSA? Like, and the can of worms that's opening to change your job. So yeah, that's why we're having this conversation, so we can highlight those kinds of things. I think there's another kind of potential trap here with insurance, not health insurance so much, but your group policies, your life insurance and your disability insurance, that can create gaps when you change jobs for whatever reason, whether it's, again, you're excited about a new job that you've just gotten or you were laid off. Either way, you've got to consider what happens to the group policy that you're about to leave behind.
Yeah. And again, it's a rabbit hole as well, because one, you want to make sure that you have the proper coverage that you need to protect your family and your financial plan. Right? That's the whole point of having disability insurance or life insurance, whether it's through your group coverage at work or it's privately or both. And so having the right amount of coverage at all times is the point. How to get there is nuanced, and there are many roads to get there. I mean, part of the reason that I like private insurance is because it stays with you regardless of where you go. And so you don't have to worry about the life insurance plan being different on the new company than the old company, because you have your private policy for $2-4 million of death benefit, and it's going to cover you through the period you need coverage for. That's a great option. You don't have to worry about it. But if you don't have that and you've relied on at least the group plan supplementing your private or completely taking care of your coverage overall, then when you leave your old plan, you may be able to bring it with you through a portability clause. If you can bring it with you, then you'll pay it on your own and you kind of take it private with you. It could be expensive though. You have to really be clear on what are you actually going to be paying when you leave the company, because it was either supplemented or free through your employer. And if it's portable, you take it and you start paying the premiums yourself, kind of like the COBRA thing we were talking about before. But you're doing that for the rest of the term that you have it for. And then the new plan in the new company may or may not exist. Right? So you have to understand, what are you moving into? And can you just leave the old one behind, whether it's portable and you don't want to take it, or it's not portable at all and you can't take it, and just plug into the new plan to continue along just fine. Like, that's an option, but you don't know until you actually understand the coverage at the new employer.
I don't love insurance. I don't, because it's you're paying for something that you hope you never use. And in all probability with something like term life insurance, the reason why it's not very expensive to cover is that it is pretty unlikely that you're going to drop dead tomorrow and the insurance company has to pay it out, right? The more likely something is to happen, the higher the premium on the insurance to cover that event is going to be. So I don't love insurance. And as I have gotten older, and as our clients have gotten older, I feel like I don't know, recently, I feel like there's been a lot of situations that have underscored, like, it's one of those things of just get it done, just even some amount of coverage. And that's a question, Eric, I want to ask you in a second, but just with clients that are, again, they're in their 30s and 40s for the most part, but there's been a lot of health stuff that's come up, things that turn out to be nothing, all the way to like a cancer diagnosis, everything in between. And people who have tried to get term life insurance and they have conditions that an insurer doesn't want to cover. There's just so much that comes up that I think just getting a basic term policy for life insurance in place just provides you a lot of peace of mind. But that brings me back to my question that I wanted to ask you, as far as most people do have some amount of coverage through their employer. And even if you change employers, the new company is likely going to have, again, some kind of group policy that you can take advantage of. So how do you look at that when you're talking to clients about life insurance or disability insurance, knowing that you're probably going to have some benefit from a group policy? How does that then inform your recommendation on getting private insurance? Because that is another cost that you have to carry. And that's sometimes the reluctance to getting a private disability policy or a private life insurance policy it is one more expense in your cash flow. So how do you kind of balance the need to have some degree of your own coverage that you don't have to like make a career decision around, like, oh, I can't lose this life insurance, I really need it. And knowing that you're probably going to have some kind of coverage through a group policy if you are, the W-2 employee who has worked at companies your entire career.
Yeah. I mean, well, when it comes to the life insurance piece, I see a lot of group plans that are actually more expensive as you start to get like $1 million, $2 million, $3 million worth of coverage than the private policy is. And the group policy will go up every 5 years as far as cost goes, or every year even, because you're getting older. Whereas the private policy, if you lock in a level term premium, then you're not going to have to increase the cost over the 20-year period or whatever term you're buying it for. So I think a lot of times people think, oh, it's cheaper through work. It's not always the case. And oftentimes it's not the case. Two, you may not be able to get enough through work. Maybe they only offer like 2 times coverage and they don't have supplemental. So 2 times your income, 2 times your salary. So if you're making $500,000, you get $1 million. And if you're making $500,000, you probably need more than $1 million in coverage. So you're going to have to go outside of that or get a supplemental policy. And again, that's where the group policies can get expensive, even if they do even have it there.
Okay. So are you often recommending to clients to skip the group policy and just get their own so they don't even have to worry about it?
Most times when we're dealing with it in a client meeting, it's you're getting the free coverage, which is 1 or 2 times, maybe 3 times your salary, and then you're supplementing with private term insurance. That's the most common thing we see.
Okay. And does that hold across disability too, or is that a different conversation because it's a different insurance policy?
Disability is a little bit more challenging because, one, there are cases where the group disability is actually pretty solid. And so you're saying, all right, I can get the group disability, but the risk is that I leave this company and I don't have the same really good policy at the new company. Again, back to the point of, do you need to supplement with private to make sure it's consistent across all jobs? But also, a lot of the group plans aren't as robust or quality as you could get privately with the different riders and things. Like a lot of times they don't have a cost of living adjustment rider for the benefit if you get paid out, which you really need if you're younger and you have 20 years to go and could get disabled tomorrow and will get a flat fixed benefit for 20 years until you would have retired, where inflation happens, everything costs more. So in 20 years, that benefit you thought was good is really crappy at that point. Or partial disability isn't a part of it, or just a lot of different things that you need to look into to understand, is my group plan quality or not? But there's also the cost, and cost for private disability insurance tends to be a lot more expensive than life insurance. So getting $3 million of life insurance coverage for 20 years is probably going to be significantly less than trying to cover 60% of a $500,000 salary, if you can even get that much. And so we need to understand what you need, where the gaps are, how can you fully embrace a cheaper version through work while also protecting yourself from job changes privately.
One other benefit that I want to talk about that's not an insurance policy, and I think a lot of people don't think of it as a benefit, but it is part of your compensation package, is access to a retirement plan and the money that you've put into it. So when you leave a job, again, for whatever reason, if you have something like a 401k, then you need to figure out what to do with it. Kind of like the HSA, actually, there's some things to consider there. But when you leave a job, when you are deciding what to do with your old 401k, there are essentially 4 things that you can do. You can leave it where it is. You can cash it out. You can roll the old plan into a new employer's 401k, or you can roll the old plan into your own IRA. So let's walk through these different options. And Eric, you tell us which is the right answer of A, B, C, or D. So option A, leave it where it is. How do you think about that?
I don't love it. And it's not necessarily because the plan is good or bad, which obviously if it's a bad plan, expensive plan, not many investment choices to select from to build the proper portfolio, that's a factor. But a lot of times it's, well, I'm just going to leave it there and it's fine. But you change addresses, you're not married, and you change your name when you get married. If you do any of these things and then you don't update your 401k in a timely manner, it's going to be really hard to even get access to the 401k when you need to move it. And you're going to have to get notarized documents, and it just becomes a pain in the butt. Not to mention, the old employer might change their plan and it might become a bad plan, even if it was a good plan to begin with, or it becomes more expensive because you're not an employee anymore. And so just the amount of potential negative impacts to leaving your old plan makes me say, in rare occasions will I say leave it. Most times it's you're going to either bring it to the new 401k or you're going to roll it to an IRA, depending on the next set of analyses that we would perform.
Yeah, it can seem like an easy answer. Like, it's fine, just leave it where it is. I'll deal with it later. But we all know how that goes, right? There is no later. And then, like you said, it's just an administrative headache and it could eat up a lot of time and effort to gain access to that plan. And it's your money. So there's no reason to leave it with an old employer. Like, bring it with you because the options are pretty easy to do that, to roll it somewhere. Option B is not the right answer, but let's talk about it for a second. Cashing it out, which is wrong for a lot of reasons, but I'll let you go through that.
Yeah. I mean, let's say in the best case scenario, you're old enough, you're at over 59 and a half, and you can cash it out without a penalty, a 10% penalty. You're still going to pay taxes on the entire amount if it's a tax deferred plan anyway. Could put you in another or two higher tax brackets. So usually it's not a good idea to cash it out. Again, especially if you're under 59 and a half and you're going to pay 10% penalty plus the taxes, and you thought you were going to get 500 grand and you get like 200. It just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, it can be tempting, I think, to look at that as a slush fund, especially if you are leaving a job because you were laid off or you can't find a new job. It can be very tempting to be like, oh, this is just a free pool of money I wasn't thinking about before. But it hasn't changed the fact that it's retirement money. It's meant for long-term growth. It's meant to be there for you way on down the road. So rolling the old 401k plan into the new 401k plan or an IRA is probably going to be the way to go. And how do you differentiate between those two options? How do you figure out what's right for you in those cases to get to a final decision on what to do with an old employer's 401k?
This is a highly contested topic, even inside the industry. I see a lot of people on LinkedIn, advisors saying, rolling it to an IRA is never a good option, versus others say that it's the best option. And so it does come down to the details, and it also comes down to the preferences of the advisor based on what they think is best. And I think the best case scenario is if you're working with an advisor, you discuss it thoroughly, you understand their perspective, you bring in your own opinions, ask questions, and then finally get to an answer that works for you. Because there is no one right answer here, even though people like to think that there is.
Oh yeah, but a lot of planning stuff, it depends. So can you walk us through the framework that you use? Like if a client comes to you and say, hey, what do I do with my old 401k? What are the criteria you're looking at to help provide a recommendation?
Firstly, I'm going to look at what the old plan looked like and the investments in the old plan, just to get a baseline. Because for every client, we're looking at their current 401k, we're analyzing it, putting together the right asset allocation based on the limited choices they probably have in their 401k, and then noting the gaps of the allocation as compared to what we would do if we had the full run of all of the possible investment choices. Like if we're on Charles Schwab's platform and we're investing client money, we have access to all the ETFs, all the mutual funds we ever wanted, versus the 401k might have like 10 or 20 different choices that might limit us. So just looking what the plan looks like, the gaps might be from what we would ideally want. We then look at the new plan and say, same thing. What are the investment choices? What are the gaps from what we would ideally want in an asset allocation? What are the costs? Is there advisory costs on it? Are there admin costs or record keeping costs that the employee pays? Sometimes they say there may be costs, so just check your report every quarter to see if there are costs. Like there's just a lot of lack of clarity there, which I don't love. But regardless, we're trying to get as clear as we can with how good is the new plan, and there's a difference between should we use it for contributions when we're there versus rolling our old money that could be significant assets into the new plan. And then we're going to compare that to what it would look like in an IRA. And a lot of times you're working with an advisor, rolling it to the IRA, you'd have to look at the costs, right? The investment management fee on the IRA is going to be X. And you compare that to the cost of the 401k and you say, okay, well, there's that comparison. If someone's super cost sensitive, they're probably not working with an advisor anyway if they're super cost sensitive, because there's a cost to working with an advisor. But if they're super cost sensitive, that might be just I'm going to roll it into the new 401k. I don't want to deal with it. Then there's the choices, right? Again, like where are the gaps in the investment allocation? So for example, what we see a lot of times in 401ks, you're not going to get direct exposure to small cap funds, right? There might be some exposure through like a general US stock market or something broad based where you don't have the ability to choose exactly how much exposure you get to small cap or value or small cap value. International developed countries, emerging markets, REITs, real estate investment trusts. Like there's a lot of things that you can't get direct access to, and you just have to let the broader mutual fund that you've chosen give you some minimal access to those asset classes. I don't love that. Some people who say, well, just index, just own the stock market, and that's all you need to do. Okay, maybe that's an option in your 401k. But if I'm looking to tilt towards certain higher expected return categories, then I'm going to want to be more precise with my investments personally and also my clients' investments. So we have to look at that to see what their allocation should be, what their risk tolerance should be, and what exposure they need to make their plan work, and how do we optimize that. And that's going to tell us 401k or IRA right there. There is one more nuance, and this is where people get in arguments on LinkedIn, or at least boast about like, well, I always tell my clients to roll it into the new 401k. A lot of high earning clients want to do a backdoor Roth conversion, right? So it's backdoor Roth IRA, meaning I make too much money to contribute to a Roth IRA. So therefore, I contribute to a traditional IRA and then convert that money to a Roth, so that essentially I'm contributing to a Roth IRA and getting that tax-free growth going forward. One big issue with that is if you have money in a traditional IRA that is tax deferred, the conversion amount is not as tax efficient as if it would be if your IRA was zero. So there's a whole conversation about that. We're not going to get into the details there. However, if you roll your old 401k tax deferred into an IRA, it basically blows up your backdoor Roth IRA strategy. And a lot of advisors will say, well, that's enough for me to just roll it into the new 401k. You can't do that blindly, because even though you're getting some tax benefit, like how much time is it between now and when retirement happens? If you're closer to retirement, the impact of doing backdoor Roth going forward is going to be less impactful. If it's longer, maybe it's more impactful. But how bad is it if your investment lineup just doesn't give you the returns compounded over 20 years in the 401k? That's unclear. And there's no guarantees for future results. So it's a gray area. And we really, hopefully it's obvious here. We really dig deep and try to understand, what do we think is the best choice for the client? What are our inherent conflicts of interest? Because if it goes to the IRA, then we do make more money. And then just throw it all out there and have a discussion with the client and choose the best decision for them. And that's the only way to really thoroughly do it. There's no black and white or just like cookie cutter rules-based system that you can always use for every situation.
Yeah, I think that's evidenced by the fact if someone asks me, like, what percentage of your clients roll to an IRA versus their 401k versus something else, I'm like, I feel like it'd be an even split. Some people put it in the new plan. Some people roll it into the IRA because of everything you just laid out. Like, it depends. It's a nuanced conversation, and you've got to look at all these factors, which is a good reason to be wary of that cookie cutter advice. It's like, oh, always do this, or always roll it into the new plan, always put it in an IRA. Like, there's no always. Like, you have the power to make the decision. There's not a rule that you have to follow. So I think that's really important to remember. It kind of puts more work on the table, but it's good to know that, oh, what do I do with my 401k? It's not a simple question. It is something that you need to think about and work through to get to the best answer for you.
Yeah. Just take an active stance and do something, even if it's just leaving it and you know why you left it. Okay, so be it. But just make a decision.
I was going to say, I think that's the only clear answer. Like, don't leave it. Just whatever you do, don't leave it. Don't leave it behind.
Yeah.
The other nuance of 401ks, forget about rolling them over for a second, but just funding them, right? When you change jobs, if you're someone who maxes out your 401k every year and you change jobs in August, you've been contributing to max out your old 401k plan. Now you switch positions, you have a new plan at a new company. You can't just keep trying to max that plan out, because you may go over the limit for the year. So how does that work? What do we need to think about when we're looking at the 401k contribution funding limit when we're changing jobs and getting different retirement plans in the mix?
Yeah, this is like the hidden gremlin in any job change for our clients, because they are planning to max out the 401k. Some people max out early because they got a huge bonus in the spring and they're contributing through their paycheck. So they're hitting the max $24,500 for 2026 by June. And that may or may not be a smart thing based on the matching and the true up provisions in the matching. That's a different conversation. But regardless, if they're hitting the max then and then they switch jobs, you can't contribute at all to the employee side of your 401k at the new job. So you might be missing out on a match for the current year, but you really cannot contribute, because if you go over that 24,500, you're in trouble. Like it's such a pain in the butt to reverse out, and you're getting penalized. If you leave it in there, then there's possible compounded implications over time for penalties. Unlike if you stay at your job where you max out, and then usually there's a record keeping company, a third party administrator that says, or payroll itself that says you've contributed the max. Even if you are continuing to contribute through what you've chosen on your payroll, we're stopping the contributions. So you get that protection. When you switch jobs, the new 401k plan has no idea what you did in the last plan. And therefore, you could just blow through that limit because the combined from both companies is the true limit, or how much you've contributed. And no one's paying attention except you.
Right. The contribution limit is not per plan. It's for the year, regardless of how many 401k plans you might end up having access to in that year.
It's per person. Yes. So like, that's the easy one. I mean, I've seen recently people that there's the contributions, the 24,500 to consider. There's the plan in this case has an after-tax amount that you can contribute above 24,500. Then the employer has a match, and then there's a profit share from the employer. And so you have to pay attention to all of that, because the true max for 401k, when you consider employer contributions, after-tax contributions, which are different than Roth, and also the employee contributions, is, I think it's $72,000 in 2026. You just got to pay attention to not blowing through these limits, because again, worst case scenario, you do, the year closes, no one says anything, and then you have to start filing paperwork to reverse money out, figuring out how much gains you got in the plan, and then like backing out those gains too. It becomes a nightmare that nobody wants to deal with. So just please pay attention to your limits and don't go through them, because you're the only one that can record the contributions, right? No one's paying attention.
So that covers gaps in benefits that you need to address: health insurance, life insurance, disability, potentially other benefits too, if you leverage them. Some clients have access to programs through their employer where they have like free estate planning services from an attorney, for example. Whatever it is that you're utilizing from your current employer, you need to kind of audit that before you switch jobs or before you accept an offer from a new company. And I think that's helpful, for your own, like, oh, what am I using here that I kind of forgot about? It was just running in the background. And then how does that impact me going forward? Because your total comp, if you get an offer letter from a new job, it might look like more if the salary is higher. But if you're losing X, Y, and Z and benefits that suddenly you have to start paying for yourself out of pocket, then that bigger salary may net out to not be as big of a difference. So it's not to say that you can't change jobs because you're going to lose some small but useful benefit over on the side. It's just something to consider and know going into, especially because if you do have that offer letter, it could serve as a point of negotiation for you. So in looking at an offer letter, I think it's worth kind of going through a couple of things, because we might find little gaps here and there. But salary and bonus, like that is obviously the thing that most people are drawn to, but it's still just one or two pieces of your total compensation. And I think people can get tripped up in just looking at that top line number.
Yeah. And this is where it's kind of like running a business, right? You can say my revenues are X, but when it comes down to it, what really matters is what is your profit? And so when you switch gears and go from one job to the next, the benefits themselves, whether those benefits are some part of the compensation, like you just talked about, maybe like equity compensation component or a bonus component, or the salary itself, but it's also the benefits that you're paying for, like health insurance and life insurance, because those could cost money. And it's your take-home pay at the end of the year that matters most, because that's going to impact your life. If you're making less net, even if your salary is more, there's a problem there, maybe, right? So if you're trying to get more compensation, it all has to make sense based on the cost of the benefits. The probability of getting the bonus, like you could be promised $1 million bonus, but the probability is if it's 10% and you're leaving a $500,000 bonus, the probability is 70% that you're going to get it. Well, that's a huge risk. And most likely you're going to make less money at the new company. And so I think it's worth considering all these things in total and really drilling down to understand the true impact on your bank account in the end. I think where it does get gray, other than just like the probability of hitting max bonus or not, or the probability of getting the commissions you're promised if you have an on-target earnings commission-based compensation package where you have salary, commission, and the total expected comp, if everything goes well, is X. is when you throw in the equity compensation piece, right? You might have had restricted stock units at your old company, which once you understand how they function, it's pretty straightforward. They kind of act like a bonus, right? When those vest, if it's a public company, you're going to pay taxes, and then you can decide on selling the shares or not. And you can understand if you get granted those RSUs at a new company, it's a public company, you can kind of back into what you can expect to get paid unless the company stock takes a nosedive or jumps significantly. But if you're going from RSUs to options, that's a different calculation. And just because you're granted 4,200 options and you had received 4,200 RSUs at the old job, that means nothing, right? Stock prices are different. The difference between the strike price and the market value on your options is going to factor into the payout. The taxes could be different if it's incentive stock options versus non-qualified stock options versus your old RSUs. So I think it's really important. This is where we jump in for our clients, is to say, like, if you're getting a new job, please send us the job offer inclusive of all the options or equity compensation that is there, because we want to make sure that we're comparing apples to apples from your old firm to the new firm before you just assume it's better. And certainly if it sounds better because the company's seemingly on a better track, that's just internal rah-rah, right? Like the new company is going to obviously say they're better, but you need to look at what your family needs, the risks that you're willing to take, and the true compensation at the end of the day.
I like that we're able to, ask the clients that work with us, like, send us your offer letter. That's part of our process so that we can review it, especially because recently we had one that came through that looked like it was offering equity compensation. But when you actually read the offer letter, it said, we will recommend to our board of directors that you receive this equity compensation worth this much. So I think initially the client was looking at like, oh, it's, what's this equity worth? And we were able to point out, like, well, you don't have the equity. They're saying they'll recommend it, but it's not guaranteed. They're not promising anything. So it is really important to look through the nuances of that. And again, ask for the benefits guide, ask for the grant agreement that their equity incentive plan is based on. Ask to see those documents up front so that you have a clearer picture of what that total compensation actually is, what is just kind of a carrot dangled out in front of you, or what could even be a potential point of negotiation. Like, that could be something to go back on and be like, this says you would recommend it. I need you to guarantee it in order to take this job. And I think looking at other leverage points too, as you go through an offer letter, could you ask for more PTO? Could you ask for a different kind of equity? Could you look for stipends if they don't have this type of insurance that you really need? Can they give a stipend to you so you can go and buy it privately? All these things are things that you could negotiate, and you might actually get farther on if you're negotiating those pieces versus just starting salary.
Agreed. I was shocked. I thought, I couldn't even believe I was reading that about that particular client, where it was like, it will recommend to the board that you get equity, and then the board, basically the board decides if you get it, but after you accept the offer. So you're kind of just screwed if they don't accept.
Well, especially the way it was written, because it was written like a very specific amount of equity too. It wasn't just like, so it very much read like this is part of your compensation, but it was a little tricky. I don't know if they meant to be like tricky in a negative way, but it definitely was surprising to see that. So yeah, definitely worth looking through that kind of stuff with a fine-tooth comb, taking nothing for granted. And again, pushing back where you feel like you have a leverage point.
Yeah. And just to tie that conversation up about the equity compensation, I think a lot of times people, one, and incorrectly assume that it's like extra bonus money when you get RSUs, and if the company stock blows up, then great. Otherwise, it doesn't matter. It's part of your compensation, so it does matter. Like, this is what you are paid to do because of your expertise and experience. So it is real money, regardless. And because of that, when you go to negotiate the next job, and you have a significant amount of unvested equity, whether it's RSUs or options or whatever, in the old company, that as long as you stayed there, you would get some portion of, depending on the stock price, what the movements happens. You can't just not bring that up to say, okay, I'm leaving this on the table to come over to this new company. What can you do to compensate me for that lost equity? It's either they're going to give you some maybe additional equity in the new company, or they'll give you a sign-on bonus to match the expected payout in the old equity. But that is such a major negotiating piece, if they really want to anyway, at the new company that you cannot not use it at the negotiating table.
Well, that covers gaps in benefits, gaps in retirement plans, possibly. And I think there's one last thing that we can very quickly mention, because the other things we talked about, obviously we've been talking about them the whole time, they're big planning opportunities, right? There's a time of transition. A lot of things are changing. There are actions that you need to take in the moment, in that transition, to get through it well. But there's one gap, which is a gap of potentially a gap in income. That's not necessarily something you can figure out in the moment. It is something you would have had to plan for ahead of time. And it's more down to a math problem than maybe some of these other really nuanced, like, well, if this, then that, it depends kind of things we've been talking about. So cash flow uncertainty is what makes career transitions feel tricky sometimes, especially if it wasn't a planned thing, which is why we always need to fall back on our financial planning principles, which having an emergency fund, that's the sort of thing that cash reserves are good for. Not living beyond your means, not getting in a situation where you do need that next paycheck and you need it now to cover your baseline spending. So when you're looking at a career transition, you want to look at, well, what's my runway here? And that's going to depend on your essential expenses, your liquid savings, an emergency fund, potentially any expected income during that transition, whether that applies to you if you could do consulting work or something like that. And then it's basically number crunching from there to figure out what your runway is. And if you have a runway of 6 months, you're probably in good shape, and any transitions probably are a bit less risky. But if your runway is less than 6 months, then you have some harder questions to ask yourself, I think, before you take a leap, especially if you don't have something else lined up.
Yeah, that's where I think it's important to understand the difference between you actively choosing to leave your job. And if you do that, the planning you should do well in advance of the first thought of it, like maybe I should build up more cash reserves to protect against a transition of some sort. But if you're laid off, you don't have that option necessarily. So you can't always think you're going to get laid off and always have more than you need necessarily in emergencies. But the things to look at in that case is expenses, right? You have some choice in the matter with, I can reduce my expenses down to like bare minimums, what we need to get by during this time of light or no income to get me from point A to point B as far as leaving one firm and getting to the next firm. This is some of the planning that we do even before someone leaves a firm or gets fired, is what is the severance package guaranteed to you in your contract? And sometimes companies have that built in so that, you know, if you get laid off for not for cause, but for just like you get laid off, you have 3 months or 6 months of severance coming your way. So that gives you a natural buffer and you don't need as much in cash. And then if you're signing up with a new company and they have a sign-on bonus, well, also you don't need as much because you can run your money down and then replenish it with the sign-on bonus. But if you don't have a severance and you don't have a sign-on bonus coming your way, and there's a gap of time between jobs, then you really have to tighten up your budget, making sure that you're not overspending, because if you run out of money, you're going to go into debt, or you're going to have to take out from your 401k, which we just talked about, usually requires you to pay a penalty and taxes. So it's not a good look in the situation where you can plan for it and then you show up and get stuck between jobs. But always be planning is kind of our motto here, and getting in front of that stuff before it either is a choice happening or happens to you is the name of the game.
And that's something that we can help with. We are taking on new clients right now at Beyond Your Hammock. So if this conversation resonated with you, or you're realizing that, hey, I might be in the middle of that transition and I don't feel quite as prepared as I'd like to be, we'd encourage you to reach out to us. You can schedule an introductory call at beyondyourhammock.com/schedule, and we can tell you more about what we do, who we help, and how we add value. Otherwise, if you are all set and in the middle of this transition, we wish you luck. Enjoy the new job that you have coming, and make sure that you are closing those gaps that we identified today across income, benefits, retirement plans, and watch those 401k contributions. Thanks for listening to another episode of Money for Life, hosted by Eric Roberge, CFP, and me, Kaylee Roberge. Our show is produced and edited by Steve Stewart. If you want to learn more about wealth management and hiring your own personal financial advisor, visit beyondyourhammock.com. And now for the legal stuff. This podcast is for informational purposes only and does not constitute financial, legal, or tax advice, and may not cover all critical, complete details of every situation discussed. The views expressed by guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect those of the host or the podcast. Please consult a qualified professional about your specific situation before making any financial decisions based on this podcast or any other educational content designed for a general audience.